Aloha and welcome to Permission to Flourish, a podcast about choosing growth, joy, and purpose on your own terms. I'm your host, Jay Cornell, and I sit down with leaders, creatives, and everyday visionaries who's given themselves permission to pause, pivot, and pursue what truly matters. These conversations are real, heartfelt, and here to remind you, you don't need permission. Let's get to today's episode.
Aloha, everyone. I'd like to introduce my good friend, Russell Betts. Russell is the founder of Connected Through Change and the creator of the Rationale Intelligence Framework. He helps high achieving couples navigate stress, success, and midlife transitions without losing connection. Drawing from over 30 years of marriage and his best selling book, The Good Husband's Guide to Menopause, Russell provides practical tools that translates emotional complexity into language couples can actually use. And I am so excited because my husband and I actually have his book and it has really helped us. So, with that being said, I'd like to introduce Russell. Russell, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for saying yes.
Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
For those who are meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm a guy who's gone through life, and what I'm doing now is really sharing what I found out from my life experiences. From a professional background, I was a CPA and a project manager and worked for a nonprofit organization. But also, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I've been married for 30 some years. Most recently, we went through this midlife thing and I call it a thing right now. I won't call it a crisis because it really isn't. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But really, what I'm doing now is taking those life experiences and trying to share them in ways that can help other people.
I love that. You talk about menopause as not just the hormonal shift, but a relational transition, which is so true. But for the listeners, could you explain that a little bit more and what you mean by that?
And I found this out just going through it myself. My wife and I, again, we've been married for about 30 years. We've had a lot of challenges in our lives, blended families. She lost three older siblings. So we've had death and all those experiences has always brought us closer together. Then all of a sudden we found ourselves that we were drifting apart and didn't really realize what was happening or why it was happening. But at the low point in our relationship, there was a great distance between us and couldn't understand why. Um, and I just started looking for answers. Why is it that this is happening? I'm a person of faith. And as a person of faith, I know that I'm supposed to have life and have life more abundantly. And I wasn't feeling any abundance and I couldn't figure out why. I was falling back in some old patterns that I had just because of childhood conditioning. Just feeling withdrawn and rejected and those other kind of things. And she was feeling kind of lonely and abandoned. And I just started searching, right? And that search just kind of led me to, what really happens during menopause. And it's really not me changing or her changing. What was happening was our reactions to our situations. So and going through menopause for a lady, really what it does is it attacks the nervous system, right? And you don't have the capacity to do anything because your nervous system is overloaded trying to figure out all these different things that are happening, whether it's the changes or the spikes in hormones, whether it's not being able to sleep at night or the brain fog that comes along with it. They're just attacks. So your nervous system is there and it's being different bands placed on it. On the guy's side, we always want to fix stuff, and if we can't fix it, doesn't work, we get frustrated, right? And if things change within the relationship, oftentimes we'll withdraw. We either will withdraw or, we're competitive and we're keeping score. And if we're keeping score and it doesn't feel like, it's balancing out, then you try, you stop putting in as much effort. So it's just those influences that are happening. And what I really realized is that relationships are good. It's the influences that are happening in midlife changes impact those. We just don't recognize them for what they are.
So true, so true. Yeah, because you know, we've had this conversation before,
Mm.
and I've always shared like this is so perfect for Tim, you know, your book. Can you share a little bit about your book that you wrote last year? Or was
Yes,
it
I
this
wrote a
year?
book called The Good
This
Husband's
year,
Guide to
last year, right?
Menopause. Yeah, came out, I think, in December. And it was a book called The Good Husband's Guide to Menopause. And it's just about the experience that we have. Just kind of walking through you. I you know, kind of look at it as I'm sitting across the table from you or out at lunch with a friend, and we're just kind of talking about situations. Because one of the things I found out is people really don't talk about it, and especially guys. You know, we don't. So I just wanted to be able to share some of the insights that I had at the time about that. So it was a good project for me. For me, I called it, it was like a therapy book. It was just being able to put out into words some of the things that I was feeling. Because one of the things when I started finding out this information was that I wish somebody would have told me earlier, so it would save me a lot of heartache. And the word came to me, it's like, well, then you'd be the one to tell other people. And so that was the reason for writing the book.
I love that. Yeah, because it's helped my husband. I know that personally because he read the book and he and you have like an assessment and a course and everything and Tim got to take that. So yeah, that was so helpful for him and our relationship has got more stable. And so my next question is to you is why do so many strong marriages feel unstable or destabilized during the midlife, especially around menopause?
Now, midlife is it's there's a lot of going on in midlife. It's your relationship matures, of course, with your spouse. But you have kids and they're going through different phases in life. You're at different places in your career. There are just a lot of pressures. And marriage is kind of like the cushion for it, right? Everything has to operate within an environment of a relationship. And anything that happens to that relationship is impacts it. What happens when menopause comes is that you don't recognize it. Okay, it becomes it's inconsistent. It's the impacts are sometimes it's light, sometimes it's not. It's always the unanticipated. When I was doing the research on the book, I found out there are at least 37 different symptoms for menopause. Okay. And they don't happen at once, they don't happen sequentially. Another thing I found out is about 20% of the OBGYNs actually have had menopause training. So, and in my wife's situation, she wasn't even going to an OBGYN, she was going to a family doctor. So you have these different things and they treat them each one as a symptom, and our medical system right now is, you look to diagnose, you look to provide, to prescribe something, but you don't have the ability to really understand what's going on with the person. So if you think about when you go to see the doctor, you have a 30-minute appointment. They ask you to be on time so the doctor doesn't have to wait. They go in, you have a nurse or somebody, assistant come in and take your vitals. Doctor comes in and you're spending 7, 8 minutes. Okay. If you're having inconsistent systems, they don't have time to see a whole picture. They're just dealing with what you present them. So therefore, there's a lot of mixed diagnosis, and you don't really realize what's going on. So you're being attacked quietly. So if your kids are going from preteen to teenage, or they're going from teenage to adulthood, you can understand what that is, right? If you're having pressure on a job, you can understand that here's the pressure from the job. I don't like this boss, or I love this boss, or I have this chance for a promotion, or I have to do that. You know what those are, right? You kind of understand them. When that midlife hits you, those hormonal changes hit you, it's really silent. So you have these things that are major that are impacting you that you really don't understand what's happening, and you take it for something personal.
So true, so true. I feel like you're speaking about me, you know, because I'm in that stage and I'm going through all of that, and everything you're saying is spot on because you only get like if you get 8 minutes, you're lucky with the doctor. Yeah, it's so different now. And it's a topic that many people shy away from. Like it's not really discussed or talked about. So I'm glad and I applaud you for the bravery for bringing this to surface because it's such an important topic, especially for marriages and for families in general. And so, you mentioned that there are many conflicts during menopause. And, a lot of it is just, aren't the normal, it's out of character, right? And there's just so much issues. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean about character issues?
It's really the impact, and the misinterpretation, I think, of really what's going on that impacts marriages in particular. So um, if you're a lady and your hormones fluctuate, okay, you react to things a little bit differently. Right? Your husband senses that something is wrong, and they immediately start to jump in to do the fix it mode. Okay. So while me as a husband trying to jump in and help fix my wife, she has these hormonal things that are going on and doesn't have the capacity to even, first of all, doesn't really understand what's going on, but doesn't have the capacity and feels like it's an attack. Okay. You're trying to fix me. I don't know what's going on. Leave me alone. Right. Then the husband goes, oh, she doesn't want my help. And then he starts to withdraw. So now you have a distance on the husband's side, and then you have the wife going, I feel like I'm abandoned. There's these things going on and he's nowhere to be found. You know, that's misconception, right? You really don't do it. I think that's one of the reasons why I started developing this down beyond just writing the book and find out where the challenges are. I started doing some other things about it. So with that, I know when we were doing the research, uh, I had a hard time finding good research. Because 80% of the stuff out there is really related to some kind of product somebody wants to sell. So I created a website called Menopause Digest, and that site is just menopause related news that's all been vetted through authoritative sources. So there's a section there for emerging news. Okay, and then there's also a site for those things that have been scientifically validated, through universities and research and things like that. So you have an opportunity to find out what's really real and what's not. And if you hear something, there's a place where you can even put it there and see if it passes through those filters. So now there's a place to go to be able to find out. And I put a little translator in there as well, because a lot of the medical jargon, I couldn't even understand. So, I would ask AI, what does this really mean? So I asked the AI, to put that in there as well. So that's a place that people go. It's just free to go to. It's called menopausedigest.com. And then the other piece I realized is that we don't have a way to be able to identify or have common language around what's really going on with us during midlife season. So through Connected Through Change, it's the website that I have. I developed a couple of assessments, one for men and the other for women. So you can kind of put some parameters around or some definitions around the season and life that you're in and the potential impacts, because then that brings awareness. And my core thought is that if you become aware of something, if you see something, then you can't unsee it. Menopause is kind of stuff that has unseen type consequences. So I want to make those things visible. And once they're visible, and then you can start addressing them for what they are. It becomes a situation where it moves from the back of your neck, the things that make the hair stand up on the back of the neck. And I do have hair back here, by the way. Hair stand up on the back of your neck to bring it over to the front so you can deal with it logically. And then once you can do that, then you can create solutions and you can adjust.
I love that when you talked about the hair on the back of your head, because on the neck, on the head, like, because yeah, I feel like Tim does that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if a husband is listening right now and really feeling confused or even defensive, what would you want him to understand first?
Um, the first thing is it's not you. Don't take it personal. Okay. Um, and then seek to be present. Okay, because sometimes that's all that's really necessary. Fixing is not it. Being reactive only makes situations worse. It's being calm. It's not being disengaged. There's a difference between being disengaged and being present, right? You need to be present, and that will help de-escalate situations, and start working on that. It's midlife is really, um, it's really not a crisis, right? If you take a away, if you take a look at it, it's really an invitation. It's an invitation to readjust, to recalibrate after all the things that have happened in your earlier years. If you look at the body, what happens, both men and women go through these hormonal type changes. It's more intense for the ladies than for the men, but it happens to everybody. And once I realized that, one of the questions I asked was, okay, so what am I missing? If this happens for everybody. And as I started doing some study and doing some brain research, that's also a time when your mind expands. From a neuroplasticity standpoint, it's more active. So your body is ready to accommodate all these changes that are happening, and it kind of focuses you. It gives you the ability to focus in on what's coming up next. So if you stop taking a look at it as a midlife crisis, and look at it as a midlife invitation, something that you're going to experience, and it's for the good, that perspective alone will help you approach it differently and have, a wonderful experience afterwards.
I know you talked about as we have conversations about rational intelligence, what does rational intelligence look like in the middle of a hormonal change?
So with relational intelligence, it's really about how you show up and perform in the environment. It's people talk about emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is fantastic. That is being aware of what your current situation is, your environment, how you feel, and how you react. Okay. Relational intelligence is now that you understand yourself. Okay. How does that show up in relationships? So that's really being able to understand that, the impact, again, how to be present in certain situations, what those pressures are, and then being able to develop and flourish in spite of everything that is going on in your life.
And the podcast is called Permission to Flourish. When you hear that phrase, permission to flourish, or the words, what does it mean to you personally at this stage of your life?
Um, for me, it's the whole study that I've been doing on the menopause and the permission to flourish. It goes hand in hand, because if midlife is not a crisis, and midlife is an opportunity, it's an invitation to find yourself and define what that purpose is, for you to be able to fulfill the rest of your life. Midlife is really the permission, okay, to make some changes, to adjust, to refocus, and to flourish moving forward.
Love that. Love that. So true. And what inspired you to write The Good Husband's Guide to Menopause?
Um, like it was a challenge that I went through. You know, Dysfunctional childhood. And I retreated back to the way my nervous system had taught me how to adapt to that, which was to withdraw. But the relationship I had with my wife was the one that kind of brought me out, saved me, from that, those early years. So when our relationship was struggling, okay, I kind of fell back into those old patterns. To the point that I was going through severe depression. Probably at some point, not probably, at some point I was suicidal. But I knew there was more in life than that. But having to go through that level of despair, okay, wishing I had answers, and then when I found answers, knowing that other people are doing the same thing, And if I were to be able to share the message, I could help avoid that for them. That's really what, pushed me toward writing the book. All right. And then also creating the Connected Through Change so that it's there to help people go through this particular time of life, but also get out that word again that menopause and midlife is not a crisis, it's an invitation.
Absolutely. Russell, thank you so much for sharing such a personal and deep story with the listeners because, we all think we're the only ones going through something and not realizing that other people are going through something similar. If someone realizes they're in the middle of this transition and don't want their marriage to drift, what's the first step you would personally recommend for them?
Um, the first step I would recommend is to stop and take a breath. Okay. Um, if you're a person of faith, I would suggest you say a prayer. Okay. And just ask for that guidance. Understanding that it's not me. There's a situation and what's going on. What can I do? All right. And then I would take a look at some resources. Okay. Again, connectedthroughchange.com is a good place to start. Okay. And we don't do any therapy, or anything like that. It's a place to get information. It's a place to get definition. It's a place to get clarity. It's what it is. And then once that happens, then you can start doing those things that are going to help you during this particular phase in life. Uh, and many times, it's just being able to have an understanding is enough to get you going. It's the proper perspective. For me, and it's happened in midlife, and in midlife isn't necessarily an age. It's a state of being. Right? Because I assume we'll be 70, right? And I'm thinking that I'm still just in midlife. But like what hit me is with my childhood. Um, Part of that was my mom died when I was early. My dad wasn't around. I lived in 8 different households before I got out of high school. And my thought was I was always a survivor, but never a thriver. And I always operated from that premise. Um, then it finally hit me, and I've heard this saying before, but it really never stuck with me, was that your worst day is somebody else's best day. And when that hit me, I realized that all those things had happened. Yes, mom wasn't around, dad wasn't around, 8 different households, but I never spent a day on the street. I never spent a day in the system. So God was always watching out for me in spite of those circumstances. But having that revelation changed my entire outlook in life. All right. So no longer was I the person who was just surviving and trying to get through, saying no is me and turning down opportunities or not feeling like I was successful when I really was, to somebody who could say now, with confidence that, my journey for the rest of my life is to be able to share this mission, you know. Um, and it was all for that purpose to do this to help other people.
Amen. Oh my gosh, so good. And I love how the how you tied it together and just the mindset and the blessing. Thank you, Russell, so much. What's on the horizon for you this year in 2026?
2026 is really just expanding the vision. It's relational intelligence is a big room that I got invited to, and the doorway that I came through it was through the midlife experience. Uh, but that also applies to other aspects of life as well. So really, what I want to do is make sure that this midlife experience is I can help as many people as I can with that. I'm writing a couple of other books. Just about the experience. One was more about relational intelligence, but it's more just kind of walking through a journey of what it is and how it impacts you. And then I'll have a follow up book after that, probably 2 more after that. Um, because I think being able to get the word out is very important. So I'll be doing that through the written medium and be doing more stuff also through video and those other type of things. But my primary focus right now is really helping couples going through the stage of life.
Yeah, and so many of us need that. So appreciate the work that you do. Russell, um, where can listeners find you? Like, what is your social media? Like, where can they find you after this conversation?
So I am on LinkedIn. Okay. Um, if you go to connected through change or journey.connectedthroughchange.com, okay, there I have a podcast, okay, and I have a blog. And what I've done is I've taken a word for the week or a theme for a week, and I'm kind of explored it through the uh, through the lens of couples going through menopause. So one day, usually on Tuesday, there'll be a blog that comes out from the men's perspective. Like for example, this week's is grace, or sorry, this week is actually rest, right? The second day is the women's perspective of the same thing and how she feels if a guy does his normal reaction to that or the standard reaction to that. And then the podcast just kind of talks about the situation in total. So each week is like a theme. So if somebody wants to come in, you can start back at day one and kind of pick it up and just kind of walk through that particular process because I wanted it to be a journey that somebody could come into at any particular time and be able to meet them where they are and help them progress through there. And then again, connectedthroughchange.com is the primary website there that explains more about the process. It gives you the ability to take the assessments as well. Some of them are free if you want some deeper understanding. Then you have the opportunity to do that as well.
Amazing. Russell, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing what you do, and so much great golden nuggets. Before we end, is there any last words that you'd like to leave for the listeners?
Um, I think the last thing I'll say is that menopause doesn't break strong marriages. Okay, misinterpretation does. Okay, once you understand what's happening in any situation, you can stabilize it. So just keep that in mind.
So good. Again, thank you, Russell. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have an amazing day.
Thank you. Bye.
Mahalo, and thank you so much for tuning into Permission to Flourish. If today's conversation spoke to you, please leave a review and share it with a friend who needs a reminder that they too are allowed to share and thrive. Visit permissiontoflourish.com if you're ready to share your own story or explore our publishing opportunities. You'll also find free resources and inspiration to help you say yes to your own flourishing journey. Until next time, keep flourishing.